Thank you for having me here today. This is a great honor, great privilege to be with you and to share the images and ideas of a very remarkable man, William McDonough. Today we are going to take a journey. We're going to take a journey into the future, and we're going to imagine a city that does not exist today, but exists in our hearts, exists in our minds, and eventually it'll exist in reality. First, I'd like to, though, introduce you to Mr. McDonough. I have had the privilege and continue to have the privilege of working with this remarkable gentleman, a gentleman who over the past 20 years has done more to change the idea of sustainability, actually to eliminate the idea of sustainability and move even further beyond. I think that Time Magazine, who honored him a number of years ago, as hero of the planet, because he is not only concerned about buildings and architecture, but about all species and all the children for all the time. He is truly remarkable. Some of his accomplishments, aside from being Time's hero of the planet, he has written 2 books, Cradle to Cradle and The Upcycle. He also authored the Hanover Principles, which we will review. He is currently the chairman of the Meta Council for the Circular Economy for the World Economic Forum. He's held a number of academic positions at various universities. It continues to do so. He lectures and teaches throughout the world on sustainability and architecture. He has the privilege of working with countries from the Premier of China, in India, a number of boards, commercial. He's an advisor to ex-President William Clinton. He is also an advisor to Rob Walton, the founder of one of the principals of Walmart. And he works with a number of organizations on a global basis through architecture, sustainability, design, a whole range of endeavors he is involved in. But what he's really involved in most and foremost is our world. And our world in a manner that is thinking we are all indigenous people here and we're not going anywhere. This is our planet. This is our globe, which we need to protect it. When the astronauts went into space and they looked back, and the first astronauts to get far enough away to see the Earth at a distance, said that they were so impressed by how blue the Earth is and how green it is. And I wonder now, as we move forward, this is actually quite an old picture. Is it still blue? Is it still green? Or are our activities damaging our world beyond recognition? I think it's important that we embrace this idea of cradle to cradle. And Cradle to Cradle, the title of his book, is also the idea of things are not made, used, and disposed, but that there's an endless cycle of reuse. And we can apply this to cities. And today we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at cities, both their birth and their rebirth. But I think part of our journey needs to start with principles. In 1992, Mr. McDonough was asked by the city of Hanover. They were having a world exposition, and they asked him to come up with some principles, some guidelines for design, for the environment, and for the actual exposition itself. And so he spent quite a bit of time thinking about this task that he was given and came up essentially with 9 principles that has formed not only his own belief system, but the belief system of literally thousands and thousands of people who have been impacted by these principles in some form or another. And the first is the right of humanity and nature to coexist. The idea that as people, we are integrally involved with our planet, and we are not separate from the environment. We impact it, as we all know, significantly. And we need to consider in design our impact on the environment. And the second is interdependence, which is in many ways similar to the first, that the environment is dependent upon us, and we are dependent on the environment. It is not mutually exclusive. And the third is respecting this relationship between spirit and matter. And what that is really thinking about our impact, what we do, how we design, how we live in this world, and what does that have to do with our humanity in general. We need to accept the responsibilities for the consequences of our design decision. As we design buildings, many of which last over 100 years, they have a great impact upon our environment, both visually, both physically, and in many ways spiritually. Ugly buildings are ugly buildings, and they are, in many ways, sort of an assault to the soul. Beautiful buildings inspire us. Beautiful buildings uplift our spirit. Great design challenges us to think beyond the everyday and takes us to a different mental place and a different spiritual place. Creating safe objects with real long-term value. We have become a society very wed to disposable. We're willing to accept that we can wear a shirt for only a couple years, sometimes only a couple months, and then dispose of it. But you know, there is no way. And the concept of long-lasting, if you think about some of your most important things that are important to you, they're handed down from generation to generation. In Switzerland, they talk about that they make watches not to keep time, because we can do that with our iPhones, or we could do that with a pretty inexpensive timepiece. But they make classic timepieces, not for keeping time, but they hand down from generation to generation to generation, something of true lasting value. And central to Cradle is eliminating the concept of waste. We almost take for granted the idea that there's waste, that we use something and we dispose of it. We throw it away. But where is a way? In your city here, where is a way? Is it the curbside? Is it a garbage can and you have no idea where that goes? Is it a landfill? Is it someplace on the side of the road? Where is a way? And the concept of waste, if you think about it, when we're designing in the idea that this has, in quote, an end of life. Now, Mr. McDonough objects to the world of end of life. I mean, realistically, does this clicker, is it alive? No, so how could it have an end of life? Really, things are just things. And in their design, if we begin to think about the concept of eliminating waste, we put on a whole new design lens, a whole different framework for designing our products and our packaging for endless reuse. And that is a term that Mr. McDonough would like you to all endless reuse. That products, the packaging goes from one use to another use to another use endlessly. Natural energy flows. We have systems, whether it's the wind, whether it's the water, whether it's the solar power. These are all energy flows. And as human beings, in early times, that was our energy. That's what we relied on. And as we've become more modernized, We have electricity, we have gasoline, we've created energy, and energy flows from other things. But as a civilization, we think we're really smart people. But it took us 5,000 years to put wheels on our luggage. So how smart are we? Then it took us another 20 years to put 2 more wheels on the luggage so that it would be easier to roll. So I'm not so sure that we have exhausted the ideas for how we can use natural energy flows. Design has a limitation. Sometimes we think that design itself will solve all of our problems, but that's not true. There are boundaries that design can't really take us past. And as we think about these design boundaries, while they're ever expanding due to new materials, doing new construction, new ways of creating packaging and products, some of the design limitations that come in are the idea of waste. Because a lot of times we are, in fact, designing in waste. And the last is to really seek constant improvement by sharing knowledge. And that's what's so wonderful about today, is the idea of continuous improvement and sharing of knowledge. And it is such a great pleasure for me to be here today sharing knowledge with you. Here we are. We're sitting here on our globe. We're thinking about the future. We're beginning to imagine what could be different than it is today. In 2002, Mr. McDonough wrote a book, Cradle to Cradle. And the book has 3 basic premises. Everything is food. If you think in nature, nature doesn't have waste. I think it's also interesting when we think about design and nature, God never had a bad day. He is continually amazing us with his design. And as we dig deeper in the exploration of how we came about and where we're going, we're continually inspired by God's design, which is amazing. Everything should use clean energy. I think one of the most interesting things in the near term, I was asked some questions yesterday by an interviewer about renewable energy. And how could a country like Venezuela, that is a very large producer of oil, very dependent on oil, how could they think even about using renewable energy? And I offered the example of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has realized that even though they can produce energy at $4 to $5 a barrel, cheaper even than Venezuela, cheaper than anyone in the world, they have huge resources. They've realized that by subsidizing the use of oil in their country, by subsidizing and using oil also to make electrical power, they're actually making a terrifically bad economic decision, because they're literally taking oil that even at today's prices they could be selling for $60 a barrel, and instead of selling it on the world market, they're using it at $4 and $5 to subsidize gas use in their own country and electrical power. So what the new leaders of Saudi Arabia have brought to the table, even against great opposition, because there's a lot of vested power in Saudi Arabia interested in oil, even against great opposition, they have said that in the next 10 years they are going to be the world's largest producer of solar energy. That's remarkable, to think that the world's largest producer of oil is thinking and moving toward being the world's largest producer of solar energy. I think that should serve as an inspiration for all of you who are thinking of using renewable power and keep coming up against the argument, but oil is so cheap and electricity is so cheap. Well, there's some really sound economics behind developing solar power, even in the face of very inexpensive oil and electricity. And the third basic principle in Cradle to Cradle is celebrating diversity. What really adds to our creative gene pool is the fact that each of us bring to the table something unique. Each of our cultures brings something unique. Each of our ways of living have brought something and bring something unique to the table. And that diversity is what enables us to move forward because we have many competing ideas. And oftentimes it's the best idea that wins, not always, but oftentimes. And in our diversity, we bring different points of view, and we paint a tapestry. How boring it is to have a painting that's just all red. How exciting it is to have a mosaic of different colors and different themes. Recently, Mr. McDonough wrote a book called The Upcycle. And he wanted to expand after almost 10 years. He wanted to expand on the ideas of Cradle to Cradle because he too is in a process of continual improvement and wanted a book that reflected his current and latest thinking. And one of the primary ideas within the book is how do we create a beneficial human footprint? Because if you think about it, in the industrial age, we were busy building and creating and in many ways destroying. We weren't interested in a beneficial footprint, or we actually had a different idea of what beneficial would be. Beneficial was more comfort. Beneficial was more convenience. Beneficial was more relaxation. And I'm not sure that's exactly the footprint that we want to leave when it's at the expense of our people and our planet. Because if you think about it, the industrial age, was in many ways the age in which we as humans had the greatest impact on our planet from all the time of history before. In that 100-year period, we had a tremendous impact on our planet. One of the numbers that always strikes me as having impact is in China, over the last 3 years, they have used more concrete than the United States used from the time it was founded to today. Over 250 years, the Chinese have used more concrete in 3 years. And what's more damaging to the environment than concrete? Very few things. And the other was a challenge. And the challenge is, how does the world get better? Because we're here. And I would suggest one of the ways is exactly what we're doing today. The world gets better because we think about these problems. We think about the global implications of our everyday life, how we interact with each other and with our environment. So this is what Cradle to Cradle and now The Upcycle, the two books of Mr. McDonough, is challenging us with, his ideas. Several years ago, Mr. McDonough created the Cradle to Cradle certification. And the idea behind that was to recognize and encourage manufacturers to create products that were safe for the environment, that were utilized safe materials, that could be in fact reused, that had cared about water, clean air, and also cared about social implication. Was it being made in a fair and ethical way? And so he created the concept of Cradle to Cradle product certification. And today, literally thousands of products are being certified as under a scale from silver through platinum. And these products are products where the manufacturer has really taken the extra time and the extra concern, but not the extra cost. A lot of people think sustainability and caring adds cost. Virtually all of the Cradle to Cradle products manufactured under this Cradle to Cradle umbrella have saved the company that is making them money. Sustainability does not have to cost. It can actually save. And some of the products, Puma shoes, Method, solar panels, fabrics, Herman Miller chairs, Ford Motor Company cars, Design Tex materials, whole range of things that are being made under the Cradle to Cradle banner. And as I said, the real tenets of Cradle to Cradle are material health. That is, that the material itself doesn't contain toxins. One of the things we looked at is that there was a very large cereal maker in Europe, and they were famous for making really wonderful cereal that was supposed to be safe and healthy. There was only one problem. They were putting the cereal in a cardboard box, and on the outside of the cardboard box, they had inks that were leaching into the cereal. So you were getting cancer with your cereal. Not what the company had in mind, but they weren't aware of what was happening with the interrelationship between their packaging and their product. As I said, the material reutilization, clean energy, clean water, and social fairness. At the heart of Cradle to Cradle is a concept from Michael Baumgart, a famous German chemist who works with Mr. McDonough and was co-author of the Cradle to Cradle book and co-author of the Upcycle book. And they have worked on Cradle to Cradle for all of these years. And the principle is that there's two systems at work in the biosphere. And the first is biological nutrients, and that means materials that go back to the soil. So when you're manufacturing or making things, there are many materials that when they are discontinued in the current product and are thinking of being reused, they can go back to the soil. They can go back to the earth. They can be composted. They can be reutilized in different manners. And the other is technical nutrients. And that was one of the big awarenesses, is that a technical nutrient is things like aluminum, lead, that if you put lead into solder, lead's a good thing. You put lead into our food, and it kills us, causes brain damage. And so how do you keep technical nutrients out of our environment and keep them, though, where they do good? And the concept is of recycling, of taking these technical nutrients and putting them back in the technical world, reusing them. Great example, it is almost 10 times cheaper today to reuse the gold from an iPhone than it is to mine that gold originally. And so the thought here is, as you're designing, as you're creating, is to take those technical things and instead of, again, throwing them away. How many times do we see TVs, telephones, all sorts of electronics into the landfill? Dangerous, and actually a huge waste of natural resources. Send them back into the technical nutrisphere. This is the University of Virginia. It's founded by Thomas Jefferson. It's the first major university in the United States. Excuse me. And Mr. McDonough, for 5 years, was the dean there at the School of Architecture. And the most exciting part of that is he had the opportunity, if you look at what would be your far left, there's a row of houses along here. And there's 10 houses. And he had the privilege of living for 5 years in a house designed and lived in by Thomas Jefferson. And he said that was such a humbling experience because he could feel the presence of history and the presence of a great man. And it was very influential in his life. As a matter of fact, one of the things that he found most interesting about Thomas Jefferson, a great designer, designed the hall at the end there. Unfortunately, it was added on to, and some of the design, let's say, altered in a bit. I think all of us who are designers are familiar with the fact that people will take what we think is beautiful and add what they think is beautiful and get something not so beautiful. And Thomas Jefferson designed his tombstone. And on his tombstone, it said, founder of the University of Virginia, signer of the Declaration of Independence. What's intriguing is what's absent from his tombstone is he was president of the United States. Because he didn't believe in position, he believed in accomplishment. And one of his greatest accomplishments was the University of Virginia. Recently, Mr. McDonough has been looking at the process of decision making, whether it's in government, corporations, or even us as individuals. And at the heart of it is his tenet that he's had for a number of years. And whenever he considers design, whenever he considers the world around us, and whenever he is talking to groups like this, if he was here today, one of the things that he would press upon you is, in design, asking the first and fundamental question: how can we love all of the children of all species for all times? And if this becomes your central theme for design, if at the start of every project, before you lift a pencil, before you begin to even conceptualize, you keep this in mind, it's amazing how that lens changes the way you look at the buildings, the products, the packaging, and even the way you live, how you design that. And when you think of it, when you think of how many business decisions are made, how many personal decisions are even made, how many governmental decisions are made, they don't start with values. They usually start with value. For many businesses, that is the important part of the equation, value. But it's very hard to increase value when you don't start with principles, visions, and goals. If your principle isn't caring about all of the children of all species, you easily lose your way into thinking only about profit and the bottom line in the next quarter. If you really don't have a vision of the future, and your vision is only the next election or the next quarter in your business, it's very hard to make sound, long-lasting decisions. And it's very hard if you don't have goals that are humanistic and that are caring for the planet and the environment and the people. It's very hard then actually to create value, because what we're seeing in the world now, in global business, are the companies that are caring more and integrating their principles, integrating their values, integrating their vision into their entire company, are being far more successful than those that are not. And I think one of the biggest examples is the two global consumer product giants. The first is Unilever. It's run by a CEO who believes in the environment, who believes in doing the right thing, and basically tells shareholders, if you don't believe what I believe, sell the stock, because I'm in it for the long term. And you compare, their company is growing by leaps and bounds, very profitable, very successful. And they've overtaken their major competitor globally, Procter & Gamble, mainstay of U.S. business, who has only been concerned about the bottom line. They haven't cared about the planet. They haven't cared about the people. They've been more concerned about profits. And ironically, they've made less profit as a result, because they've been concerned about their strategies, their tactics, and their metrics more than their values. So we like to think that creative value, in thinking about your values, helps you achieve your value creation. And this is a message that we take to the CEOs of major corporations all over the world. Over the last years, we've talked to people from 3M, Procter & Gamble, Caterpillar, Unilever, Coca-Cola, Disney, a number of companies, and we've posited this very chain of thinking, this way of looking at your values as a tool of value creation. Now, one of the challenges to leaders, one of the challenges to leaders of business and government is moving from just doing things more efficiently to doing things more effectively. There's a big difference. You could be very efficient doing exactly the wrong thing. I think we all know about that. I think we've all seen it. It is far different to think about how to be effective. And it is a leader's job to think about being effective, a manager's job to think about applying that into becoming efficient. So how do you build a modern city that loves children? How do you build the city around us into a city that truly loves children? One of the first things is to think about a concept that Mr. McDonough introduced and continually is discussing and talking about. Most of the effort in the world of the environment, in the world of sustainability, is about doing less bad. We're going to reduce our water consumption. We're going to reduce our power consumption. We're going to do less and less. But we're not going to eliminate the bad thing. We're just going to do less of it. Well, it's kind of ironic if you think about it. If a company says, next year or the next 5 years, we're going to reduce our water consumption by 20%. Well, if I'm the corporation's president and I really think about that, I go, so you mean we've been wasting 20% of the water for the last 5 years, and over the next 5 years, we're just going to gradually waste less water? That's really bad management. Very large U.S. retailer we were working with, and they said, we're going to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel-generated power by 20% over the next 5 years. And we looked at them and we said, boring. That's not really that's no great goal. That's not inspirational. 20%? Come on, how could we go to 100? How could we separate one of the world's largest retailers from a reliance on regular fossil fuel generated power? And they thought about it for a while and they said, well, what would the goal be? 100% use of renewable power as soon as it's economically feasible. Because it's still a business. I mean, it's got to be feasible economically. And after some thought and consideration, they came back and they said, we will do that. And the most remarkable thing about that decision, what was incredible, is that when they put it out to the field, they thought, oh, our managers and our executives, they're going to think this is too big a challenge. The field responded and said, how do we do this? We want to do this right away. We want to be engaged. We want to lower our costs, our reliance. We want to be good citizens and reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. And it was really surprising to their board and their leadership that the field was so enthusiastic. But I think we know in this room that if we, for example, had a goal of separating our major companies in this country, in Venezuela, from a dependence on, even though it's cheap power, cheap electricity, and encourage them to say, we're going to use renewable energy. You've got a lot of sunlight out there. Sometimes there are a few clouds, but you've got a lot of sunlight. What a wonderful goal that would be. What an inspirational goal. So we use this, and we call it the upcycle chart. And we use it to plot this idea of, are you just taking an initiative to do less bad, or are you trying to do more good? This is at the heart of Cradle to Cradle. And again, it's at the heart of understanding the biological nutrients and technical nutrients. We also use a tool called a fractal triangle when we're working with corporations and governments. And the idea is that there's pretty much a three-legged stool. And most corporations are just worried about this economy square. And they give a little thought occasionally to the equality. Equality would be equal rights for women, consideration of children, child labor, the basic tenets of fair treating of people. We put at the top the environment, and again, many corporations do not consider in their strategy development the environment. They are now, though. More and more corporations are integrating the environment into their strategy. The reason for that is, I'll give you an example. One of the world's largest bottlers of soft drinks is looking around the globe, and they've identified a number of plants that create the bottled goods that within 5 years are going to run out of water. And 2 of them are brand new plants. And what these become then is stranded assets. It's a plant that's very capable of producing the product, but a main ingredient of that product, in this case water, is going to not be available. And they are being forced in accounting practices now to, on their books, recognize these stranded assets and the cost of them. And to this one company, it was over $385 million in assets that, because of climate change, because of the shifting water tables, because of the shifting weather patterns, these plants that they originally thought could operate for years and years and years, were planned for years of operation, are going to run out of water in the near term. So the environment is affecting the economy dramatically. I want you to hold on to being less bad is not being good. You know, if you are just a little less bad, but still doing the wrong thing, that's not good. And as we say, oftentimes people will say doing things less bad is doing things in a way that they've always done them. It's history. And we like to say that in doing things the right way, you're changing history. You're changing philosophically how you look at things. And if you do less bad and you do more good, then you're doing the right things in the right way. One of the ways is how you treat your waste and recycling. And one of the examples that is often used in the United States is the city of San Francisco. They are one of the most effective recyclers and managers of waste in the country and also in the world. And Mr. McDonough and McDonough Partners are currently designing a new facility for a firm called Recology. And Recology is the firm that manages the waste and recycling in the city and area of San Francisco, and have been doing so for many, many years. And the city of San Francisco has put a very high priority on managing their waste in the most effective way that they can, not the most efficient, but the most effective. And they are also managing it in a way that captures the most amount of material. Is this inexpensive to do? No. Does this require resources and commitment, dedication by government? Absolutely. Is this something that will benefit the city for hundreds of years to come? Yes. Has it benefited San Francisco for the past 30 years? Absolutely. Trying to have a clean, healthy city is very important to the government and to the citizens of San Francisco. And one of the things that they do is they've embraced the idea of nutrient management. If you think of a sewer system, if you think of a waste facility, it's collecting nutrients. And these nutrients have other uses. And one of the biggest uses that they're finding is for creating fertilizer. And so instead of the wastewater plants just disposing of huge quantities of wastewater, they're creating ways of capturing the nutrients in the wastewater and moving it from waste into a valuable asset of fertilizer for the soil. if you think about a city and imagine a city designed and buildings designed where the things of the building, when it's built, are able, when the building changes use or is it no longer useful, that those materials themselves have great value. For example, a building made of concrete, when it's going to be reused and eventually torn down, what do you do with all that concrete? It's one of the most challenging and difficult things when tearing down a building is to use, what do you do with the concrete? And so Mr. McDonough and his firm are thinking about all of the different ways and different materials that could go into a building, that when that building is deconstructed, taken apart, they have usefulness. And one of the examples of that is in Holland, in the Netherlands, near Amsterdam, near the airport. And they're creating buildings that they know exactly by the quantities and that, all the material going into the building, and they have made a roadmap for when the building is torn down, where those materials would go, where the steel would go, how the carpet would be reused, how the interior structures would be reused. And what's interesting about that is those buildings now are easier to finance by the banks, because the banks are going, well, instead of it being a cost to tear down the building, we're actually going to get money if we tear down the building. It's a very different way of looking at it. A building like a tree. You know, trees are very wonderful creations. They take sunlight, they take air, they take water, and not only do they grow, but they give us back new life. They're continually putting into the atmosphere those things which are so important for us to live. And so I wonder if you built a building, designed a building like a tree, a building that actually breathed. You know, for a while it was very popular to build buildings that were very closed, that literally when you were inside, the only air was the air provided maybe by air conditioning. And those buildings have since, many of us know, are become toxic. They're hazardous places to work. As a matter of fact, it was ironic in the United States that one of the most hazardous buildings to work in was the building for the Environmental Protection Agency. There were people who actually passed up positions to work there because they didn't want to work in the building because it was such a toxic building. So think about designing. What would it be like to design a building that breathed like a tree? You know, a building that breathes and has, emits oxygen, sequesters carbon, fixes nitrogen, creates food, fuel, water, habitat, changes colors, has the ability to self-replicate. A building like a tree. What a wonderful idea. Now, what's ironic, this is an ad for Toyota. You see the Toyota Motor Company. It says 0 emissions. And think about what a goofy ad this is. What does a tree do? It emits. And to label it with 0 emissions is one of these ideas of global corporations trying to use the environment, trying to use a sustainable message, but unfortunately not having any idea what they're talking about. A car that has 0 emissions tied to a tree, which is one of the most emitting things on Earth. A city in which we could grow food on our rooftops. I think one of the biggest opportunities, and the mayor and I were talking about this yesterday, and I know you have a wonderful library that has this roof garden on top of it, but wonder if in the roof spaces, I know that sometimes it's difficult to acquire food in an urban environment. It's expensive, it has to be trucked in, maybe it's not available. But wonder if we thought about all of our rooftops as potential places for growing food, instead of these usually ugly white surfaces or black surfaces that are doing nothing. Wonder if we used every rooftop and created the potential for those to be gardens to feed people. cool the building better, provide a habitat. A wonderful thing that might be. We've thought about designing into a whole city the idea, and this is in Denmark, of creating a city where the conference facility, this is a concept for a conference facility, where the entire roof of the farming in the building and all around it was involved in rooftop farming, vertical greenhouses, greenhouses inside, food production, buildings as farms, serving many purposes. What a wonderful idea. And you could take this open land idea and convert it to many rooftops. Mr. McDonough has done so in a number of buildings throughout the world. And I think one of the most remarkable is a factory that's now in India for Hero motorcycles. It's one of the world's largest manufacturing plants in the world. And when they approached Mr. McDonough, he said, you know, I really don't want to build in so far away from my organization, and I'll pass. But he went to sleep that night, and at 2:30 in the morning, he wakes up, and he goes, I know what I want to do for that plant. I know what we need to do. Because the challenge of the plant is, this plant had to make all of its own water. There was no water in the area. It had to make all of its own power. There was unreliable power. And there was also a scarcity of food for all of the people who would be working in the plant. So it had to do at least 3 basic things. It actually does 9, but the 3 basic things is it had to produce food, power, and water. And he gets up at 2:30 in the morning, and he draws this, scribbles this out, as you can see, if you're architects or designers. It's kind of the first concept drawing. There's the next concept drawing. And what you see here, what's remarkable, is on the top of the roof here, these are all solar panels. But unlike this typical flat array or that, they're brought up off of the roof high enough that people can walk and work underneath. And what has happened is that there are actually more people who work on the roof of this building than work in the building. And the people on the roof are gardening with the water that's made through osmosis from the building, from the heat from the actually testing the engines, creates a steam that creates a water for not only the water the building needs, but the water for all the plants up here. And the solar power also generates the power for the building, but also generates power to help with the farming and gives those shade to the people working on the surface or the roof of the building. So it's a pretty remarkable structure. And there it is in real life. It is opened in October. It's Hero Motorcycles. They are the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. And it is a building that we like to call the factory of the future. And in fact, we have people coming from all over the world to look at this building because it is the factory of the future. It is what a building can be if you come from your values to create value. If you think about your principles of serving the greater good of all species on our planet, you come up with a building and design a building that feeds its people, provides jobs, provides water, provides power, a building that is truly like a tree. There's some other pictures of it. It's a huge structure, and it sits in the middle of a very, very arid area. Some of the solar arrays on the building. That's when they were starting to create the gardens. They brought all this earth up and put it on the roof to create the farm. There's a view inside. It's a many 100,000 square foot facility. One of the things it has inside, so that the inside breathed like a tree is the whole walls are filled with plants. And these plants are then watered from the water produced by the building. And so that the air inside, they don't use air conditioning, even though they're in the middle of a desert where temperatures often go above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The plants help keep the air both healthy and cool. A number of years ago, in America, the National Space Association came to Mr. McDonough and said, we want you to design a space station for Mars. You're an incredible designer. Why don't you design a space station for Mars? He said, I can't do that. Because as long as we're destroying the Earth, why are we going to Mars? But what I'd like to do is set an example for the government and build a space station here on Earth, a federal building that actually breathes like a tree. He said, well, okay, we'll try that. Because this is a famous scene in American history. It's when the astronauts who were going to the moon called in and they said, Houston, we have a problem. And they're all sitting around here trying to figure out, because the capsule had become immobilized, it lost a lot of its guidance systems. And when Mr. McDonough said to NASA, you have a problem, they listened. And instead of building this, they built this. This is called Space Station America. And it is a facility that, it's a government building that was built on schedule and below budget and produces over 120% of the energy it needs. It uses very little water. It breathes fresh air. The louvers, the funny story about the louvers is that the people, the government people said, we don't want louvers. We don't like the idea of louvers. We don't want people opening the windows. We don't want fresh air. It's kind of a strange idea, but that's government, even in the United States. And so Mr. McDonough said, fine. Let me see about that. So what he did is, you see these columns on the outside that hold up the building? Well, he made the louvers integral to the columns so that they couldn't be removed. There's always a way to fool the government. You just have to work at it a little bit. He has a wicked sense of humor. And this is where the building sits. It's over in this corner, way over here, is the structure. It's right near San Jose, California. And it is it's a structure that's now being used as an example within the government of what can be done. And very interestingly, in a city that I live in Colorado, near Denver, and they built a government building very similar to this in that area, also under budget and breathed like a tree. These are some of the ideas of roofs that can be conceived as photosynthesis plants. This is not really new, but when Mr. McDonough proposed this in 2005 for the Republic of China, this was radical. Putting solar panels on roofs. This was an idea in 2005 that was considered very unique. Obviously, now we see many facilities that have solar panels on the roofs. And even skyscrapers can be renewable in certain climates. This is for Abu Dhabi, and it is was designed to take advantage of their sunlight, and to overcome the need for vast amounts of energy to cool the building. The design theme is such that it allows the building to ventilate all of the hot air that comes into it in a method that you require far, far less cooling of the building. And some of it is the angles that are used. This was brought forth at the Future Energy Summit, 2008. And On a more mundane basis, a challenge he was given from a company called Method. Method is a cradle-to-cradle inspired company. They produce hand soaps, detergents, and that in an incredibly environmentally sensitive way. Virtually all their products are cradle-to-cradle certified. And it's a company that has shown tremendous growth because of the sensitivity, the sustainable story that the company has, and the quality of the products that they make. But they said, you know, Mr. McDonough, we'd like you to, you've helped us with cradle to cradle. Could you build a factory for us? But something very simple, something inexpensive to do, but something that has renewable power, renewable energy. So again, he's busy with his schedule in his sketchbook. And he creates this, a very simple tip-up building with solar panels, but it's also got solar farming on the roof. It's near Chicago. There's a lot of wind, the Windy City, so it also uses some wind power. And this factory opened just a few months ago. This is a building in Barcelona. And what's interesting about this is that in Barcelona, they've got some very wonderful butterflies, and they were becoming extinct. So what they needed to do and wanted to do is see if they could preserve the butterflies. So he developed a system of windows and a double paneling cantilevers so that it created habitat for the butterflies as part of actually the building's exterior. And what they do is the butterflies during the week, they live inside the walls of the building. And then on the weekend, the children come and open the louvers, and the butterflies fly out into the city. Very remarkable. And this is in Holland, in the Netherlands. It's using some of the old existing fields and creating a whole industrial park that is focused on cradle-to-cradle design principles. It's called Park 2020. It's near the airport in Schiphol, Holland. And most of these buildings are in existence today. There's a picture of them. Some of our biggest companies in Europe are part of this park, and it's growing every day. This is some of the material flows within the park, where we're looking at how the different materials are. And then here is one of the campuses he designed in California for a software company. Here is one of the green roof concepts, and this is Ford Motor Company. And Ford Motor Company was one of the original green roofs in the world and still is one of the largest. And I think what's remarkable about this story is William Ford Jr., who at that time was the CEO of Ford, wanted to remake the River Rouge factory. The River Rouge factory was symbolic in America of the most polluting, ugly, destructive facility in the United States. Produced trucks and cars for Ford Motor Company. It was a national disgrace. It contaminated the water, the air. There was a joke that they showed a picture of the building, and it was all gray and ugly, and they said, this is a color picture. And so Mr. Ford had an ingenious idea. Mr. McDonough had never designed a factory before this, but he had read Cradle to Cradle, wanted him to design a factory. And he called a meeting, and a big public meeting, a meeting somewhat like this, and he was describing some things that they were going to do for the city. And then very quickly into that meeting, he said, and now I'd like to introduce Mr. William McDonough, who's going to redesign the Ford Motor Rouge plant. Now, what's ironic about this is he never asked Mr. McDonough. He never talked to him about doing this. And he did it in a very public way so that it couldn't be undone, because he said later that if he had brought to the board of directors this idea of Mr. McDonough building a factory with a green roof, they would have laughed at him. Said, this isn't possible, we're not going to do this. But because as chairman and CEO, he declared it publicly, they couldn't take it back. So Mr. McDonough, though, had to go and talk to the board, and say why this was a good idea. And they had already authorized some $58 million for water management, storm water management on the roof, because it's a huge, huge roof. And they said he came in and he was told he had 2 minutes to present his idea. And that's a picture of what it looked like, talking about ugly. And he said, I want to tell you about this. I am going to produce a factory for the birds. They looked at him. Yeah, we knew this guy was crazy. He's going to have a factory for the birds. But then he said quickly, you have budgeted $58 billion for stormwater management. My green roof will only cost $19 million, will only cost $2 million to maintain over time instead of $20 million. And so what I'm essentially doing is today, I am bringing you an order at the current profitability of the Ford Taurus car. I'm bringing you an order for 954,000 cars. The profit on those, what do you think about that? All hands went up. Billy approved. And he said, boy, I have 20 seconds left. And this is how it came to be that the world's largest green roof, still in existence, still doing what it was supposed to, came to be. Nike invited, they were building a new plant, or new headquarters in Europe. And they had invited, over a 6-month period, the top 5 architectural firms in the world. They came over 2 days to present their ideas and their concepts to Nike to build a new corporate headquarters. And they came with huge models and teams and theories and philosophies of how this building was going to work. 48 hours before the presentations and competitions, they asked Mr. McDonough to come and present. They felt that they'd been told he really needed to come and present. So he said, sure. So all of these big famous companies came, and they had their models, and they had teams, and they had drawings and schematics and fancy PowerPoints and the whole thing. They all gave their presentations, and then Mr. McDonough came on, and they said, well, where's your model? Where's your team? He only came with one other person. Where's your PowerPoint? He said, I would be insulting you. I have not been to the site. I have not talked to you about how you want to work, how you want to produce, how you want to create in this structure. I haven't talked to the city. What are their hopes and dreams? What are their fears? I haven't talked to your workers. I haven't talked to the people. How could I be so arrogant as to come to you with a design that you had no part in, that you weren't part of the process, and that the people who needed to work here, the people who lived around it, were not even consulted? So Nike goes out of the room for a little while. They come back and they say, Mr. McDonough, we want to hire you. We like your idea. And by the way, we have 18 months that we've set aside for design and permitting and everything. And he said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we, right, I'm here, I'm in Amsterdam, let's go talk to the people, let's go talk to the city. And within the period of 1 week, he had come up with the design, talked to the people. The city, instead of taking 18 months, liked it so much because of their input that they approved the design virtually right away. Permitting happened, and it saved Nike over 15 months of development time by using an approach that very few architecture firms at that point did, to be inclusive, to ask questions, to not be arrogant. And this is a building that was created, the campus outside of Amsterdam. There's a number of plans he's done for China, looking at different types of residential solutions to help them with their problem. They're not very thoughtful in their design of their cities right now. They just throw them up. So since 2005, he's been working with them, although I'd have to say it's very challenging in China to get them to think humanistically. This is an idea of a building in Holland. It was one of the first ideas of building an office building to eventually become apartments. so that if you start with the idea that after 15 years, maybe it's not going to be an office building, maybe it'll be turned into housing, which is very common now, why not design it as housing first and then think about it as a business building second? And how do you make those two compatible? And this is a facility in Holland that was really built to make both office use and eventual apartment use in compatibility. 2006, New Orleans was hit by one of the most devastating hurricanes ever. Certainly was great evidence for all of those who don't believe in climate change, but most of the people who didn't then still don't, but nonetheless. Brad Pitt, who has a great affinity for New Orleans, said, I want to do something for the city. I want to help rebuild the Ninth Ward, and I want to do so in a way that's different. I want to do something that kind of honors the citizens of New Orleans in a different way and protects the citizens. So he enlisted Mr. McDonough, and together they created what's called the Make It Right Foundation, which is building, if you look over on this side, it's building houses in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans that was devastated during that hurricane. And the beautiful thing about the houses is that they're all designed cradle to cradle, and they are very sensitive to the human condition. That's the Ninth Ward where these buildings are going up. There are a number of architects are in the design of those, but what's common to all of them is that they are all built with materials that are not harmful to human health. I'd like to use this little boy as an example. When people were displaced from the Ninth Ward, they were forced to live in trailers provided by our government. And those trailers had insulation and material filled with formaldehyde. And almost all of the children wound up getting sick. They couldn't sing, they couldn't dance. Now, if you know anything about New Orleans, it's very culture built on song and dance. And the kids were getting asthma. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't sing, they couldn't dance. But then they moved into these new houses. And this little boy literally could hardly walk to school. But he moved into these houses, and within 6 weeks, he could sing, he could dance, he could feel proud, he could be part of New Orleans again. A phrase that Mr. McDonough truly embraces will follow this phrase. This is really the commerce of taking. Think about all of the businesses, all of the governments who act on how much can I get for how little I give. It's a destructive concept. Some equate it to capitalism. Doesn't need to be. This is more about people's heart and soul, or lack of it, and how they go about organizing their business or their government. If you have a commerce of giving instead of commerce of getting, you rearrange this equation. You change the words to how much can we give for all that we get. So as a society, as a community, as individuals, as a government, as designers, if we come to a problem, if we come to a challenge, not thinking about the getting, but the giving, and how much can we do for what we get? How much joy is in that? Far more than the other. And with that in mind, we've started projects all over the world. Solar panel projects. This is a big one in the Middle East. We have a new project that is taking solar panels and lifting them up. So instead of the idea of how much can we get from these solar panels, we turned it around and said, wonder if we put the solar panels up 6 feet, and instead of kicking the farmers off, the grazers and that, we actually provided shade, provided good soil, provided nutrients, and increased their ability to grow their flocks. So not only do we get solar power, but we get farming. And the people who lived on the land don't have to move off the land, and the land gets better. Great architect Louis Sullivan said, form follows function. Then another great philosopher said that less is more. And what Bill McDouglas says is endless is more. The concept of endless reuse, endless creativity. And I want to finish with the roof, the Ford Motor Company. Eggs. After this roof was built, within several weeks, the Kildare goose came and laid eggs on the roof. 2004. And these eggs on the roof are like the opportunity that faces us all. It's the opportunity of new life, new thought, new beginnings, an opportunity to look at what can't be done and say, why not? What are the barriers? Let me break them down. A chance to look back at government and say, why? And why not that we do something positive? I'd like to challenge each of you today to think about these eggs on the roof, to think about life coming back to a city, to think about the power of doing the simple things that might seem very complicated. I'd like to challenge you that you all can be participants in endless change for endless benefit, for the glory and the good of all of the children, for all of the species, for all time. Thank you.